Welcome, folks, for the first in our latest series of shows on Socialist Telly, the Safe Ed for All show. As regular viewers of Socialist Telly will know, we've had the pleasure of hosting Safe Ed for All, an advocacy group comprising parents, teachers, other assorted professionals a number of times now, and that's been with good reason. Throughout this pandemic, the seriousness of the impact on schools and our children has been consistently played down. It's been played down again now, even after they have been identified as the single biggest source of transmission of COVID in this country. And as such, we at Socialist Telly felt these guys needed to have their own show. They deserve to have their own show, to keep highlighting the issues surrounding our schools, to keep awareness raised, even as we somewhat ironically enter the summer break. So joining me on their inaugural show are some familiar faces to those who follow Socialist Telly programming. It is Sarah Saul, Lisa Diaz, and Claire Kosler. Welcome back, ladies. How are you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine.
Glad to have your own show. Excited about it?
Nervous.
Nervous?
Yes.
You're all hands now. For anybody who hasn't seen your earlier appearances and who still may not be familiar with your work, would you like to briefly tell us again how Safe Ed came into being and what your aims are?
Anybody want me to take this?
Go on, Sarah.
Go on then. Just stop me if I miss something. Basically, we joined together as a bunch of parents who'd met through Twitter primarily. All of us with different circumstances, but all of us concerned that school safety just wasn't in place. You know, all of the measures that were needed in every other indoor setting where households mix were not in place for our children in schools. We couldn't get our heads around this. We talked amongst ourselves. Lisa was instrumental in pulling a few of us together into a WhatsApp support chat group, Parents Against COVID in School, the PACS group. So we came together, we shared our stories together, we supported each other a lot. You know, people were writing to their schools, were engaged with their schools and their teachers and their local authorities and trying to find in their own local ways things they could do. And then we had a suggestion, well, you know, there is a bit of a gap there for Safe Ed. There were already groups out there and some of them are fantastic and have got lots of followers and they're doing lots and lots of amazing things, I'm sure. But we just felt there was a gap for Safe Ed to push, not to focus on any particular circumstance. So we do support a lot of our families do have children and family members with who are clinically extremely vulnerable, but we also support everyone. We felt that no child should be subjected to be placed in an indoor setting where they were unnecessarily and knowingly being exposed to increased risk of infection. So we just wanted to encompass it should be safe education for all, for the school staff who have to work there, for the families whose children come home to them at the end of the day, and for the children themselves. So we decided to bite the bullet and start Safe Ed. And we are just parents and some teachers and, you know, concerned individuals. We're not professionals. This isn't our career choice. This isn't something we wanted to be doing for very long. I think we all firmly believed by October half term last year that would be it, done and dusted. Infection rates are going up, children are being isolated. Can we get the measures in place now? And it didn't happen. Then we expected it to happen at Christmas, you know, with all the hoo-ha of Greenwich being told that they couldn't close early and all of the things around that. It didn't happen. Then when the announcement came in January that remote learning was the priority for most, apart from key workers and vulnerable children for January and February, we thought surely when they go back in March, that 9-week space they had, that everything would be put in place then. Again, it hasn't happened. Then came Easter and it hasn't happened. And we're still here now at the end of a term with, 5 or 6 weeks. Scotland's got less now. And nothing has been done. There are no changes. In fact, anything that was there, such as the idea of bubbles and isolations of close contact, is being taken away. So we're really, we're here and we're still fighting and we're still shouting and we're still saying bang the drum for a safe education for everyone and let there be choice for people and get these mitigations in place. Is there anything else you two ladies would like to add?
I think you've covered it, Sarah, for me.
Thumbs
I
up.
like Claire speak.
Ultimately, it's that same old story in a sense that our leaders have let us down. Politicians are not saying what needs to be said. They're not saying the right things. they are not reassuring people, and therefore advocacy groups such as yourself spring up to raise awareness, to say what needs to be said, and to demand better, to hammer the message home, to take the argument straight to them and say, look, you're not saying this, you're saying something that we don't agree with, we don't feel reassured, we don't feel our children are safe. Why are you not backing us and reassuring us and saying the things that need to be said and following the science that we're looking at, we're reading, and you are doing the complete opposite. You're scaring us, you're worrying us. Why are you doing this in this way? And there's advocacy groups for all kinds of issues. I guess because this government is failing people on so many fronts. I mean, Socialist Telly has sprung up in a similar way because we're sick of the media and we're sick of what we're doing, and we're not necessarily trained professionals either. I'm a welder. I'm not a journalist. But I have a big mouth and I'm prepared to use it. And you guys are prepared to come on and put yourselves forward and say what it is and demand better and say, look, I'm not going to put up with this from this government or this official or this organization or this body and these people that are saying something I completely disagree with. This is how these things spring up, but people have to get on board and support that. So how has the support grown for Safe Ed?
Anybody else want to take it?
Go on, you go, Sarah.
Well, it's slow. It's slow getting the messages across and getting the contacts with the right people across. Can we take your slogan, by the way? We're just a bunch of parents with big dogs who want to make a noise. Shout about it. We'll use that as our tagline from now on because that sums us up. We've each individually on Twitter, we've got gained followers and we're interacting and we're discussing things, and we've got an awful lot of support through some members of Independent Sage and some teaching support networks. But getting the message out there is very difficult when we have a small amount of followers ourselves on Twitter. We rely a lot on other people spreading the word for us, and it is very much word of mouth. If things we've had to say have been liked and people are interested in it, then word of mouth, it does get spread around a lot. And taking every opportunity like you offering is brilliant. It just gets the message out to a few more people, and those people who are interested in what we've got to say will join and help spread the messages as well. We're the type of group that realizes there is no one size fits all. There are parents out there. If you take a look at the three of us, for example, Lisa has held out. Lisa is, she's took the stance. She does not want her children exposed to COVID in schools. And she has faced the fines and the threats and the gaslighting and has stayed steadfast at the minute. Claire was put under ridiculous amount of pressure. I won't say too much about your circumstances, but her son has special needs and they could not guarantee that her son would not be exposed to COVID in his school setting. And Claire has had the same bullying, gaslighting, threats, real psychological warfare in some cases, wasn't there? There was, the Zoom chat where your son was asked to join his class for a Zoom chat, and then they take the opportunity to.
It was like the step for children. Caspian said, they said, Caspian, why aren't you in school? And he said, my mummy says it's not safe. And these two children actually said in unison, school is safe. And it's like,
no.
I mean, fortunately, Caspian was just like, yeah, no, just no. But who would put children in that situation? I'm not even sure their parents knew they were on that Zoom. It was all, some of the techniques that have been used against us have been abysmal.
They have, which then resulted in a long story and a long ins and outs. And Claire, at some stage, I'm sure you've already explained a lot of your circumstances on other shows, but Claire has had to deregister her son now and has to electively home educate. But when I say elective home education, it's not really elective, is it? It's coerced deregistration. Take away the stress and the added pressures that you've already got, those pressures within family circumstances for lots of other reasons. Didn't need an extra one on top. So
yours has got to be one of the worst ones I've heard of, Claire. It really makes, honestly, I could cry thinking about. Getting social services involved. What is all that about? how low can you get?
Yep.
You know,
And-
I feel like we're in a parallel universe. It's
Mm.
absolutely bonkers, threatening you with well, I've had threats of fines, prosecution,
Yep.
jail, 3 months of jail. Who
Yep.
in their right minds would say we deserve to go to jail for protecting our kids in a pandemic? There's absolutely no debate that schools aren't safe. You know, Boris Johnson said that kids are vectors of transmission. In a meeting, a couple of in one of these things with Valence and Whitty, one of the daily briefings, he said, "Oh well, this will be a good fire break." You've been telling us it's safe for the past 18 months, and now you're saying it's a blinking fire break.
I must admit, those two get on my nerves a little bit insofar as they will say things like this and they will row back on what the government messaging is, but then they will still stand next to Boris Johnson. And just the very act of standing there is an endorsement of everything he's saying. And they're prepared to do that. That winds me up. It really does wind me up. But your stories, harrowing as they are going to be replicated across the country. Parents who might be watching this right now, this will absolutely speak to them. But getting involved in Safe Ed for All gives you a community, if you like, an assembly of parents who are going through similar things, who are just as concerned as they are. But it gives you somebody to talk to. It gives you a support network, and it gives you a chance to be part of pushing back against that. It's a complete, as you say, you're just mums, essentially. You're
but also to make people aware. To make people aware. I mean, if people's children are not in school, people whose children are older, do not know what is going on. They do not know the lack of mitigations in school, and they don't know what parents are actually going through, or the postcode lottery that appears to be involved. Some authorities have gone, okay, fine, you're clinically vulnerable, keep your child at home. Others have handed us with social services, prison threats. Some parents have been threatened with things like ankle tags, all for keeping our children safe. I mean,
well, it's a little surprised that for this first show especially, that we're going to be focusing on one of your most recent actions, which is the parent declaration letter, which you've had drafted. This is less of a petition and more of a statement of intent, I felt. It's strongly worded. It accuses the government basically of pursuing herd immunity, of not following the science. Pretty damning stuff. How has Safe Ed arrived at this point that you feel a declaration like this is now required? Lisa, go on.
We've tried everything else, Damo. We've tried speaking to the head teachers. We've tried writing nicely to the local authority. We've presented reams of scientific evidence. We've gone to our local MP. I can't tell you how many times I've written to Lisa Nandy. I've written to Keir Starmer. I've written to Kate Green. I've written to, I have been non-stop. And and if I get an answer, because I'm mainly ignored, but if I get an answer, these are the responses I get. COVID is going to be with us for a long time. That's not an argument. If it's going to be with us a long time, which it is with this blinking government, you mitigate, you make schools safe. It's not okay to say COVID's going to be with us for a long time. Let's give up and everybody catch it. No. So that's a non-starter. What other thing? We're following the government guidelines. I've no doubt, but they're rubbish. They're not worth the paper they're written on. So that doesn't mean your school's safe. So all we get, if we're not ignored, we give them platitudes. Okay. That, things that they just don't make sense. They're shot down in an argument. So I don't want to, it's not my intention to be like really militant or anything, but we've no other choice. We've tried every other diplomatic avenue and we just get gaslighted or ignored. So it's a case of, right, okay, if we all stand up and we don't send our kids back because it's not safe. I'm not even going to go into the science there. It's blindingly obvious they're not safe. 30 odd kids in a classroom, no masks, open a window, that's your ventilation, and that's it. And the government, they're not even pretending schools are safe. They want to pursue herd immunity through kids and young people. So we're saying we're not going to be part of it. And this, do what you will. Are they going to send us all to jail? what are they going to fine us all? If we all stand together, what can they do?
You make a perfectly valid point. I mean, there's no room in our prisons anyway, aside for actual crimes, shall we say?
Yeah, like load of mums,
It cannot be a crime to want to look after your own children. I mean, every parent has a duty of care first and foremost to their children. If schools are not felt to be safe by any parent, then that's something that has to be addressed by the school, by local councils. The trouble is, where the government has only issued guidelines all the time, different councils, different schools are interpreting them in completely different ways, which is why you guys have had such a vicious time trying to deal with your schools and your local councils. Other people, like myself, for example, schools have been quite reasonable and quite engaging with us. But it is a postcode lottery, like you said earlier, Claire. It's not good enough. And when they're determined to get kids back into school, but not offer them jabs. I mean, vaccinate is all they're talking about. Every PMQ is Boris Johnson's go-to response for whatever he's been criticised for. Is vaccine. Well, it's the NHS that's delivered it anyway. Nothing to do with that useless sod. But the kids are not being offered these jabs at all. So you're sending them back into schools. You're determined they got to go to school. They got to learn. Okay, fine. I appreciate that. They need an education. Nobody here is arguing against that. But if you're not going to jab them up and give them a vaccination in order to be safe and try to reduce transmissions, then you are pursuing herd immunity. There is no question about that. There's no grey area here.
No.
If you are not state schools, state schools, because if the vaccine's been passed through the MHRA, that means, for example, a private paediatrician could give it. What they're saying is our children aren't worth the money. Our children are not worth the investment. Our children are not worth the safety measures in schools. Our children are not worth the vaccination. I'm sure their children aren't at risk. I'm sure Eton has HEPA filters in every lavatory, whereas our children in a state school are not getting the protections. And as a parent and as a former teacher, I'd presume a school had a duty of care.
Well, you would assume so. You would assume the schools have a duty of care. But again, they're interpreting guidelines given them by government, but not rules. There's no rules. There's nothing to follow. They're lifting rules. They're leaving things with guidelines. They're leaving it up to teachers. They're leaving it up to parents. And this is a blame game being set up, essentially. Because when it all goes up again in September, as it will, because we're going to see a dip, of course, over summer. We know we are. And we know why that's going to be. It doesn't take a genius to see why. But when it all goes up again in September, it'll be parents, it'll be schools that are blamed. There's a scapegoat being set up by the Conservatives there because they always need a scapegoat. They cannot accept blame or fault for anything whatsoever. It's the same story time and time again. Now, in your letter, you've stated 3 requirements that must be in place before September. Reduced class sizes to meet better ventilation levels and enable social distancing, mandatory masks unless exempt, and CO2 levels to be monitored along with improved air filtration and ventilation. These are all common sense moves. You can appreciate the logic here when it's an airborne virus and you want to try and mitigate it. However, the government have made masks optional everywhere, done away with social distancing completely, and are doing away with close contact isolation as well. They don't appear to be anywhere near on the same page as you folks, and don't seem determined to carry on down this road of destruction that they're on. This declaration letter is to be sent to Gavin Williamson, still somehow the education minister. He's not been very visible of late. Have you heard much from him to give you much information? I've got to ask.
Nothing. Where is he?
Not a sausage.
What pressure are you prepared to bring to bear to be heard? So you've handed your declaration in and he's ignored it. What's next?
Don't send him back in.
Yeah, we're all prepared. You know, everybody who signs that letter may not all be prepared to be able to keep their children off. However, what we want is a show of force in the signatories. And if we get a large amount of numbers, we can't be ignored. We will get attention. People will ask the questions. Now, whether or not every single name on there is playing a poker game and is it a bluff, are the Department for Education willing to take that chance? Because at the minute, there are parents who have been for a full academic year willing to take that chance and take that stance and hold their attendance. Now, when it's clear that this government are following a policy and a strategy of vaccinate and infect rather than vaccinate and mitigate, it's becoming more and more clear. I think more and more people in the public are aware that this isn't a sensible strategy. It isn't being followed in most other countries. You know, the CDC and in America, they've said that masks will be mandated for all public schools from this semester starting. Why
Even with the vaccine as well, Sarah?
Yes,
even vaccinated kids.
Yeah, and they're looking to vaccinate below 12-year-olds very soon
Yeah.
as well. That's just been approved.
And Ireland have vaccinated as of today, vaccinating 12 to 17s as of today.
We really are the only ones who aren't doing it.
As we become Plague Island to the rest of the world, which they're noticing, you know, they're not letting us in, they're not letting us travel, they're not letting us have the freedom of movement and luxury of the holidays that everybody wanted to go to. It's going to, the fingers are being pointed at the UK, and unless things change with lots of the policies around COVID, not just the school policy, you know, the support for those who need to shield and things like that, there's an awful lot that needs to be put in place. People who are on low income jobs who can't afford to take time to isolate, they need the support too. There's an awful lot of other things to follow a zero COVID strategy, and obviously zero COVID before everybody starts doesn't mean get case numbers down to zero. It means push the infection rate as low as possible while you're putting in support measures and target every single outbreak. You know, it is achievable. It is being done. It is being done around the world. So anybody who says it's not possible and not achievable, if you look at our daily death rate the other day, was equivalent to the death rate New Zealand has had throughout the whole pandemic. Why can people not? Why aren't more people making more noise about this? I don't understand it. But yeah, Safe Ed aren't going anywhere. We won't be ignored. We want this to happen. And if this doesn't fire a shot across the bow and say, parents will use our personal responsibility, which is what you're telling us to do, and we will keep our families safe. And we'll do it in whatever way is necessary. And if that means, in my case, I have to keep banging on at the school, and my boys will be wearing their masks while infection rates are high and until they've been vaccinated. People have got different levels and different risk appetites, and we understand that no one size fits all, but we will keep fighting for this. We will keep trying to make sure that people understand there is a better way. There always was a better way. In-person education could have carried on. If you look, there was a post the other day from Gavin. What's his surname?
Yamley.
Yeah.
Yami?
Yes,
His child's school had not one single case of a child being infected. Yet his child's school is in the States, and they had mask mandates, they had reduced class sizes, they had some blended learning, they had optional home and remote education for those who wanted it for a time. You know, they had air filtration and upgrades to all those kind of things. So it's possible. It's not unachievable. Nothing.
But they weren't mains air filtration. They were the Corsi boxes, the things which cost £150 each. Yeah. Not having to rewire the entire school, as in you can put it into a plug socket. And it's proof.
It's proof that it can be done. I drove past my child's school today. This is going to shock everybody. They are now having work done to have solar panels put on the whole roof of the academy. This is the same school that told me they couldn't afford a £90 CO2 monitor for a classroom. So you tell me where the priorities are.
Yeah.
I'm livid about it. I've banged up an email.
Yeah. I mean, we've had parents.
How much money have they saved by not educating? How many children did we say were being home educated? 38,000? And probably a good amount of those, like my son, are SEN. So how much have they saved from all the teaching assistants, all the extra pupil hours? But they still can't afford to do this.
There's even been parents. One of the dads said he'll buy a CO2 monitor and an air filter for his daughter's classroom. And they said, no, you can't do that. And he was like, why? And they said, well, it's opening a can of worms. There's so much gaslighting from the government, and it's just a huge, people's knowledge about COVID differs so dramatically. You know, the head teacher at my kids' school made kids take the masks off at the gates. but then quarantine
too.
Christmas cards for but then quarantine Christmas cards for 3 days.
Yep,
Just doesn't-
that too.
And then this same woman was saying, churning the government's guideline, head teachers should assure parents about the measures in school. How can she assure me when she doesn't understand that masks
No.
work and like quarantining a Christmas card really isn't that important?
No.
Yep, mine told me that hand sanitizer made it very sure, and that I had health paranoia because I didn't want to send my son into
I can't cope.
Victorian school with non-opening windows and a woman who refuses to admit that COVID is airborne and took his mask off every day.
Sheer bloody-minded ignorance, and it's
Mm.
keeping up appearances. The school wants to look like it's doing something. Oh, we'll quarantine the cards, but God forbid we open a window or pay for a vent or something like that. This is an airborne virus. It has always been an airborne virus. This is why wearing masks were brought in. This is why social distancing was brought in. To reverse that, while it is still prevalent in our country, is stupid, is counterintuitive to what they've been telling us all along. Yep. And makes absolutely no sense. And anybody saying otherwise is defying logic, because it's quite simply, this virus travels by air. The way you mitigate it is to protect yourself from such things by wearing a mask. Everybody wear a mask. Everybody protecting each other from it. Are you keeping your social distancing, keeping your numbers down in the classroom in confined areas? And I remembered again about what they do in New York with the ventilation, that you can go onto a website there, and every single classroom in every single school in New York, you can go onto this website, you can see what the ventilation standards are in that classroom, what facilities are in there, how many windows there are, whether they've got extra ventilation in there, what the CO2 levels are in that room, and you can look it up online wherever your kid is, and you can get that information. Why can we not go into schools and make a very simple assessment of the air quality in rooms, of the ventilation quality in the rooms? And for those schools that don't have facilities, I remember what it was like when I was at school. It was a very old prefab building from the 1960s. Half the windows were nailed shut. It's no longer standing now. But that is, there are still schools like that, or worse. There's no ventilation there at all. And the excuse making on the half part of the school, I just don't understand it. Do you or do you not put the duty of care to your children first and foremost? Or are you just following orders, essentially?
Yeah.
Fear of losing
Following orders.
Following
orders. Well, explain this. If the social distancing was being kept to, why were we still getting notifications of NITs? NITs can't jump 6 feet.
No.
But in the same breath, they're telling us social distancing is there. It's not.
We keep
Yeah, but you don't need social distancing if they're all facing the front.
Yes,
Remember,
in a school, of course, only in a
people
school.
can't turn their heads.
Yeah.
And COVID only travels in straight lines. I mean, some of the mitigations are just laughable.
Yeah.
What's another one? So
And the yellow lines on the floor.
Lines on the floor, because COVID knows when to stop when it sees
Yep.
a red line. And what about the one where teachers...
It only mixes at the gates.
Oh, yes, of course. And in primary schools, teachers have to wear masks in all communal areas, corridors, except in a classroom.
Yeah.
So then they can
knows
take
about
the
that.
mask off because COVID somehow doesn't come into classrooms.
No, it's very well behaved.
Well, I think a lot of this is coming from the fact that there's a lot of mixed messaging out there, not just from the government, but different, bad faith actors, I suppose you could call them. Different voices in the media are telling a different line depending on which newspaper a person happens to pick up or which news channel they put on. And there will be some people who are watching this and they're going to see your letter. Obviously, we're going to link that to your website and point that out to them, and then look at falling positive cases as we're going to be seeing over the summer and say, well, the vaccines are doing their job and they're making us all safe. And you've got people like Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London telling us that it'll all be over by the end of September. And of course, his voice is being amplified by mainstream media. This letter hasn't just been produced by a group of angry mums. You've had scientific and professional input as well, teaching staff, and you've had consultations with members of Independent Sage as well, I believe. So it's been put together with very serious, very learned engagement and argument. And to my mind, anybody that's not coming on board with this is missing the point now, because now schools have broken up. The students are no longer doing relentless lateral flow tests. There's been a shortage of them in recent weeks anyway, which would certainly be skewing testing figures as well. And therefore, positive cases are going to drop because there's less tests being done. Surely now, we are expecting this drop in cases now that schools are closed. Many around the country were forced to shut early. It shouldn't be long, due to severe COVID outbreaks. Surely this proves the point to even the most hardened case that the point has been well made, not just by yourselves, but that schools are the biggest vectors of transmission. Those are Boris Johnson's own words. Vectors of transmission. Surely we should be saying now is the time to put these measures you've asked for in place so we don't return to rising cases come September. And then
there was the other thing that came out today as well, which is if you've been tested positive once, apparently if you're tested positive a second time, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
So how many cases are going through like that? I should imagine there'll be a reasonable amount of children and families who've had it once, and if they're getting it back on the rebound with the Delta variant, it's not coming up. So that would explain why the numbers are down.
So COVID doesn't strike twice now.
No, apparently it does. Not in England.
No, it
not in England.
Twice, but we don't record it.
No.
It's madness. I mean, as you say, these measures that we're asking for, it's not rocket science. They're not expensive. Before you start telling me how expensive it would be to provide a school with one portable CO2 monitor, it's £90 plus that, okay? So if they had one, even for a whole huge academy like my boys go to, they could spend the summer going to each classroom, working out the calculations. There's a calculation online that shows you the density, so how many people per the size of the room and what it would do to the CO2 levels within it and whatever. So, it's all there for them. They could do it. They're just choosing not to because the government isn't telling them to. We've asked for this since March, when schools closed 2020, that those things should have been put in place before children were returned. Children were returned, key workers, small groups, year 6, vulnerable kids were returned between March and the end of July. And infection rates with children then, with those small amounts in where social distancing could be adhered to, I don't think they were anywhere near what happened when they all went back one big fell swoop with no changes. A bit of hygiene theatre goes on, but there's no effective mitigations for an airborne virus, and that's all we've ever asked for. What we're asking for is perfectly reasonable. It's accepted in many other countries around the world. If you want to prioritise in-person education, you need to do it without unnecessarily and knowingly infecting children, school staff and their families. Surely that's, it's not morally or legally correct. And maybe the reason why they have better mitigations in most of the US is because they're a more litigious society, and being able to litigate is easier there than it is. Because we, believe me, trying to find a law firm who can find the hook, as they call it, to take on the DfE, to challenge them over what they've done, is proving very difficult.
Against any public body in the
UK. We are on the way, and it looks like we're going to take a private, personal, individual case that'll have to do and try to use that as the test case, unfortunately. But what we wanted to do as a class action was to act against the DfE as a whole and say that this isn't fair, this is discrimination against young people, their families and school staff. That's exactly what it is. It isn't acceptable anywhere else. If you want to have a real laugh, go and look at the risk assessment for the Houses of Parliament. I went and had a look at it.
I did.
Somebody else, a friend of mine, did a risk assessment for a school based on the Houses of Parliament. They have filtration, they have masks in all areas, they have testing, they have isolation, they have a limit to the amount of people in any one space. All of the spaces in Parliament are designated how many people can be in that area in one particular space. So all we're asking for is the same things you've done in the Houses of Parliament.
When the politicians do what they're asking everybody else to do, it's safe. The simple fact of the matter is, and you saw them before they broke up with summer recess, they were still wearing masks. They were still.
And how many of them are double jabbed? How many of them are fully vaccinated and
Mm.
still adhere
Yeah.
to the mitigations, which is right because you can still pass it on and people have vulnerable people at home. Our children aren't vaccinated and some school staff might not be fully vaccinated by the time they return. There's lots and lots of different instances where people are younger age groups haven't yet got to that stage or won't be 3 or 4 weeks past their second jab and things like that. They're still at heightened vulnerability. All we're asking is the same consideration for our children, our families, and our school staff. And I just don't understand why that is so controversial. I really don't. I don't understand why us standing up and saying, well, if you don't do it, we won't comply and we won't send our children back. Why is that so controversial? I don't get it. At the minute, parents have the choice. You comply and send your children to school where you run the risk every day, as I have, despite the fact that my boys wear masks, of one of them coming home either as a close contact and then maybe relative, or coming home and being seriously ill and and then you test them and they've got COVID. You have run that risk. So comply, and who knows what the long-term effects are of COVID. Nobody knows at the minute. So without going into, people talk about long COVID and people dismiss it and lots of other things. It's recognised, it is accepted, and it does happen. And
if you inserted any other disease, I mean, think of an airborne disease, I don't know, TB.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be allowed. Or if you said, let's not bother vaccinating against polio, our children don't really need it, that wouldn't be allowed. So, and we have absolutely no idea what this does. I mean, I was reading a study today about the effects on the brains of growing children. And we're prepared to allow our children, who are, not to be funny, our future, to end up with serious disabilities before they even start for something which is eminently preventable.
Absolutely.
I think I read that one, Claire. It's something about it lowers the IQ, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even in mild cases.
Yeah.
Because the fact that, I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor and I don't know much about science, but the fact that it affects your taste and smell, that is all to do with your brain.
They reckon
so
it
who's to
affects the
say it's going
brain
to stop
stem.
there?
They reckon
You know
it
what I
affects
mean?
the brain stem, which is basically where the little point. I mean, I have migraines, so I read a lot about it anyway. But where your brain interacts with basically the cross point, where it interacts with the rest of your body, and that is one of the most crucial points of the human body. And they reckon that it massively affects that, and the blood-brain barrier, where you cross over from, like, the blood system that goes around the body into the brain, and that's massive. That, I mean, apart from seeing things like migraines, I mean, it would also interact with sort of autoimmune disorders and things like that, and it is a massive point, you know. And I think the other point in this study was, it wasn't just serious hospitalized COVID, it was some of them were asymptomatic, yet they still had the same symptoms. I mean, what kind of government are prepared to do that to their children?
Yeah,
Well,
and all we've asked
Where's
for,
the
not their
opposition?
children, our children.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
their kids will be all right.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
all we've asked for is a precautionary principle to be applied, as it has been and is expected to be in law, in health and safety legislation. All identified risks must be mitigated to the lowest practicable level.
Yeah.
You tell me that it's not practicable to improve ventilation, to allow children to wear masks, and to lower class numbers. It is.
But if they wear masks, they can't understand what they're saying, and the teachers can't hear what they're saying. And
Of course.
I mean, whenever the argument that gets me is whenever they bring the issue of money into this, because let's face it, whenever they need money, they can find it. I will never, ever get over the fact they spent £37 billion on a test and trace system that didn't work. Your £90 ventilators, Sarah, I did the maths here a minute ago. 400 million of them you could buy for the price of what they've slapped up the wall to keep Dido Harding in a job, essentially.
A £90 CO2 portable monitor that could be taken from classroom to classroom and get, you know, as you say, not every classroom will need ventilation improvements. Some classrooms may already have HEPA filters. Some classrooms may already have natural ventilation, which is adequate for the amount of people inside it.
Used to build up a New York-style data plugin that parents can then access to find out what the situation is in their local school. And of course, if things are not great in that school, or if they need improvement, then parents can rightfully say, here's the evidence, we want better, and go to their MP or go to their local council and say, look, sort this out, or else you've got every right to not send our children there, because here we have proof that it's not safe. But that's what the government doesn't seem to want. It doesn't want parents to be able to prove that. And I mean, if we move on a minute to something that's sort of this leads on to the nuclear option, if I might put it that way, is to withdraw children from school if adequate safety measures are not put in place. The Commons Education Committee has now called for there to be a register of home educated children, especially in light that numbers of children being educated at home are surging, because BBC figures released on the 27th showed that 40,000 more children entered home education between September 2020 and April of 2021. And to put that into perspective, 23,000 children entered home education over the course of the previous 2 years. And here we are, we're talking about a gap of some 8 months. It is surging. People are withdrawing their children, but instead of worrying about how many are entering home education, which from this government I'd expect nothing less than it being an exercise in spying on people and seeking to coerce students back into a school education, shouldn't they be taking more time right now to make schools safer, so fewer parents feel they have no choice but to take matters into their own hands?
I think I mentioned to you before we came on air that in February this year, under Freedom of Information, I wrote to the DfE and asked for, can you give me the figures of elective home education deregistrations for 2019, 2020, 21? And I was told, and I posted it on Twitter, the letter's there for all to see, we do not have this information. So they don't have the information. Now, I do know the journalist who was involved, because she spoke to some of us and trying to get the figures, and they had to apply Freedom of Information requests to each local authority. So it beggars belief that there isn't a register already of those people who are electively home educated. It's perfectly acceptable and people can do it. So why isn't there a centralised register of those who are doing this? It should exist if it doesn't already exist.
But to be honest, they don't really do much anyway. No. I mean, I deregistered at the beginning of May. I was told the home education service would be in touch with lots of vital support. You can guess what's coming next, can't you? I haven't heard a thing. Not from any of them. Not with support, not with any guidelines, not with the curriculum details I asked for. Nothing.
That's just sick. And they've, Caspian's got extra needs as well.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, is that even legal for them just to, have they not got more obligation to provide?
Yeah, they have got more obligation, but they've done nothing. They've done absolutely nothing.
And again, on top of the threats you were subjected to and the guilt that you were, the psychological stuff that you were subjected to, that you were responsible for ruining your child's life chances. You were responsible for not allowing your child to socialize in appropriate ways. It was all your fault.
Yes.
And you've still got no blame here.
I was going to damage him psychologically, apparently. Yeah.
But then the minute you deregister, crack on then. Don't care.
Yeah, crack on. Crack on. It's free. We don't have to bother. Yeah.
Now all of a sudden they're interested in how many people are being homeschooled. It's just going to be it reminds me of the process that people who have disabilities go through to claim disability independence payment, that kind of thing. The kind of hoops that you've got to jump through for that, and they want to assess you, they want to find out what's going on in your life and all the rest of it, and then they are looking for every excuse under the sun to try and deny you that.
Apparently, long COVID's a new one. Apparently now, if you mention long COVID on your application, that makes it even longer.
Well, in America, they've just recognised it in the States as a disability, which is a bit of a step forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
So again, we're behind the rest of the civilized world.
Well, we're not a civilized country.
Well, we're not. No,
that's a stretch. I mean, the way that's being run, it's not. There's nothing civilized in forcing children back into school, knowing that they're going to spread the virus in amongst themselves, take it home again, and figures will rise. We've been here so many times now. With this cycle is repeated 3 times over now that has resulted in lockdowns.
But if we did that, If we did that, if we knowingly sent an infected child to school, you can bet your bottom dollar we'd be in court. Or, you know, if we failed to show a duty of care towards our own children, you know, we would have referrals, snap, 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 snap. But on a mass level, when they do it towards our children, that's fine.
This is my fear. They have demonized different demographics for so long in the 11 years that the Conservatives have been in power. This is just going to be another exercise in them doing this once again. Only this time it's our children being targeted, and by association, because this virus will be driven by that you know, our children, it will go on to affect more and more people. The long COVID thing, I mean, it's something like 10% of everybody who gets infected suffers from some degree of long COVID.
Yeah.
As has been said on the show already, we do not know what the long-term ramifications of that are. We do not understand it well enough. There are all kinds of things we're discovering about it that are quite harrowing, quite frightening, but we just don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. It's all too new.
We won't do for a long time either.
Not worry about it, whereas we're terrified.
And in addition to not knowing what the long-term effects of an infection, whether mild, hospitalized or severe case, not knowing, we're talking about children who are going to be exposed over and over and over again to every variant, to every, you know, a reinfection. They may have had it mild, they might not have built natural antibodies enough to stop them getting it again. Nobody knows what the long-term like prognosis of being repeatedly exposed are. I mean, let's hope in 5-10 years time we find out that actually it was all right. That's not what the data is showing us at the moment, but you know, that could happen, and I'll be the first one to go, well, you know, we applied, we wanted the precautionary principle applied, we fought for it, and you know, it shows that perhaps it wasn't as dangerous as we originally thought.
But to be honest,
very much. But
even if that's the case, that's them taking a gamble.
Yes, I don't gamble with my children's health.
No,
not legally or morally acceptable to gamble with your children's health. And you know, these ridiculous statements that people come out with, more children. I mean, Jenny Harris, and they've got more chance of being knocked over by a bus than being ill from COVID. Well, there's an awful lot of bus accidents now with children, isn't there? Because they're all those who get it. Not everybody returns swiftly to pre-infection health. You know, I've told you before about my older boy, and yes, he's great now, and that's fine. But one thing that does happen is he then goes around thinking that I'm being slightly overcautious because I'm asking him to still wear his mask to protect his asthmatic younger brother who hasn't had it yet. And he says, yeah, but I won't get it again. Well, there's no proof to that. We don't know whether you're getting it.
The way things are being run,
how it'll be.
The way things are being run, with not everybody being vaccinated and everything being opened up in the way it is, with schools continuing to be ignored essentially as a crucial step in wiping this virus out, all we are doing is promoting the development of more and more variants. And the longer this virus exists in the environment as it is now, and the more chance it has to continue to mutate and change into new variants, the more chance there is that the vaccines are going to become less and less effective. Unless we get on top of this and deal with it properly, as other countries have. And on Socialist Telly, we always come back to New Zealand, because New Zealand is so exemplary in how to deal with this. To date, they've still only had, I think, 26 fatalities to COVID, because they absolutely shut down at the first sign of an outbreak of this, and they don't lift again until it's gone. I mean, they've proven it works. Another island nation like ours, and people keep saying, oh, well, it wouldn't work there. There's more people here. People here wouldn't do it. Hang on. People that did the lockdown thing, they've done the mask things. They've done it. They've proven they've done it. The only reason that you're saying now that they won't is because you want to open up and you're trying to put some sort of economic boost first. But even that's failing, because unless you get rid of this virus and deal with it properly, the economy is never going to recover, because people are going to keep getting pinged and go on the sick. It's not a ping-demic, it's a pandemic. The pings are only as a result of the government's failure. Every ping is a nail in the coffin of this government's ineptitude to deal with this properly.
And Brexit. But the other thing is, what is the worst that you can get for the measures we're asking for in school? I mean, I'm an ex-teacher, and a few of us in the group are. Any former teacher will tell you that ventilation in classrooms is absolutely abysmal. And okay, we asked for these, you know, COVID comes, goes. But do you know what happens? The classrooms are better ventilated. Children are not falling asleep at their desks.
Yeah.
It's not like anything we're asking for is going to have a long-term negative effect. It's going to have a
We said to
long-term
have legacy benefits.
positive effect, isn't it?
They just want
Absolutely.
to spend money. They don't want to invest. Somebody said it earlier in the show. I forget who's mentioned it now. They are, I think it was you, Claire. They are our future. They are our future, and this government is not investing in them.
No, in any which way.
No, they're doing the complete opposite, really. Now, the letter, the declaration letter is, of course, available on the Safe Ed for All website, which is safeedforall.com. Please do visit it. If you're a concerned parent, this is a website you should be watching and having a read of. It's under the link at the top, labeled "Open Letters to Sign." Please do pop in and sign it. I think it's a Google document, isn't it, Sarah? So you can go in and
we've actually changed that demo, and we changed it after the first couple of days. We've hosted it now on change.org, so I'll send you the link and when we
okay, so change.org then, and we'll add that link into it in that case. I've signed it myself. I feel extremely strongly about this as a parent. If you feel as strongly as these ladies do, as I do, then please do take the time to visit and sign up too. The more people that do, the more seriously the government are going to have to take the issue. It cannot be ignored. And as our children are being scapegoated right now for the sake of the government getting some brownie points, essentially, for opening up. This is only going to bite us on the backside. We know it. If you're a logically thinking human being, you know this is not going to end well. My thanks to Sarah, Lisa, and Claire tonight. We will be back with another Safe Ed show next week. Cheers, folks.